Hi class, welcome to CAS 100. Chapter 1 is a good introduction to the art of public speaking, why it's so important in your academic and professional life, and how you can use your own conversational skills to become a better public speaker. All right, so let's get started. Public speaking is a vital means of communication, and we'll come back to that when we talk about the different speeches that you'll be doing in class. But right now, I just want to talk about the power of public speaking and how your text goes over this. The need for public speaking will touch almost everything you do in life. It's a great way to make your ideas public. It's important to your career. No matter what your career is, you will need public speaking. I actually remember reading a quote that said that in a recent survey of more than 300 employers, 93% said that the ability to think critically and communicate clearly is more important for career success than your undergraduate major. So that's a pretty important reason to learn public speaking. And public speaking, it's also a vital means of civic engagement. It's a form of empowerment. In communicating things that you care about, you can do it clearly and accurately. So as I said in the beginning of this lecture, there are a lot of similarities between public speaking and normal conversation that you do every day. In both, people organize their thoughts logically. You will take your listeners systematically, step by step through your message. Each speech will require an outline to help you do this. In both, people tailor their message to the audience. You will learn how to analyze your audience and adapt appropriately. In both, people tell a story for maximum impact. You will carefully build up your story and adjust your words and tone to get the best effect. And finally, in both, people adapt to feedback from listeners. If your audience looks confused, bored, or even angry, you may need to adapt your speaking style to them. However, there are differences, and you will be learning about these differences throughout our class. The first one, probably one of the most important, public speaking is definitely more highly structured than ordinary conversation. For example, all of your speeches in our class will impose strict time limitations. They'll not allow for interruptions with questions or commentary from the audience, and you'll need to accomplish your purpose in the speech itself. Also, in preparing your speech, you must anticipate questions that might arise in the minds of your listeners and then answer them in your speech. Public speaking also requires a more formal language than ordinary conversation. So you might want to avoid slang and jargon unless it's really needed for the point of your speech. Definitely improper grammar does not have a place in public speeches. Listeners usually react negatively to speakers who do not elevate and polish their language when addressing an audience. And finally, public speaking requires a different method of delivery from ordinary conversation. Effective public speakers adjust their voices to be heard clearly throughout their audience, including adjusting posture, avoiding filler words, and avoiding distracting mannerisms. So I usually always ask my class, who thinks they'll have stage fright? And I always say, if someone doesn't raise their hand, they're not being truthful. Stage fright is normal. It's anxiety over the prospect of speaking in front of the audience. It's entirely normal to feel nervous about the prospect of giving a public speech. Even experienced public speakers have stage fright before their presentations. And what I'm going to talk about in the next slides are 6 different ways, 6 major steps actually, that you can use to control your nervousness and make it a positive force in your speech. So we'll go through those in the upcoming slides. So one is to take a speech class in which you learn about the speech making process. So you're doing that right now. You're acquiring experience. This experience will definitely help you in future speeches of not having speech anxiety. One of the main things you need to do is prepare. You must prepare your speeches. The more you prepare, the less nervous you'll be. I always say that. The more confident I am, the less nervous I am. And of course, it's crucial that you think positively about yourself and the speech experience. If you think you can do it, you usually can. But unfortunately, if you predict disaster, that's usually what you get. That goes into the next one, using the power of visualization. This is another excellent way to combat stage fright. Visualization is closely related to positive thinking. And what you're doing is you're creating a vivid mental blueprint in which you see yourself succeeding in your speech. Um, and you need to also know that most speakers are helped that knowing that your nervousness is usually not visible to the audience. Every one of you will have to videotape your speeches, and I always find it interesting when students write their self-analysis. They usually say, wow, I definitely wasn't as nervous as I thought I was. And of course, the last one, you don't expect perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect speech. And even if things might not go as planned, your audience won't notice because they might have no idea that you skipped a word or skipped a point. So please do not expect perfection. You should also know that positive nervousness is actually a good thing. If you control your nervousness, it actually energizes you for your presentation. So think about that. You know, maybe if you've ever played a sport, a musical instrument, anything where you were in front of people, doing something in a high stress situation, you've probably realized that when you're nervous, you can control it and actually turn it into energy for your presentation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, visualization. This is picturing yourself giving a successful presentation. I do this quite a bit in my own speeches. I actually visualize myself going step by step through my speech successfully. And it really does help me once I get up there. Another important thing you're going to learn in this class is critical thinking. You've probably heard this before, and that's because public speaking helps develop this very important skill. Critical thinking is focused, organized thinking about such things as the logical relationships among ideas, the soundness of evidence, and the differences between fact and opinion. Critical thinking involves a number of skills. It involves the ability to assess the strengths and weaknesses of an argument, distinguishing fact from opinion, judging the credibility of sources, assessing the quality of evidence, discerning the relationships among ideas. These are just a few things that you will also learn throughout this class. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the speech communication process. I'll go through each of these, and if you look at some of the speeches I put in Canvas, you can look at this as well. Who is the speaker? What is the message? What channel are they doing? Who are the listeners? Are they giving feedback? Is there any interference? And what's the situation of the speech? So I took this is directly from your text. So the speech communication process is, it begins with the speaker. Obviously, you are the person who is giving the message. The message is whatever you're communicating. Then the channel is the means by which it's communicated. In a public speaking class, the channel is you, obviously. The listener is the person who receives the message. Feedback is sent either verbally or non-verbally from the listeners. Interference is anything that might impede the communication of the message. This could be internal. Maybe your listeners are having a bad day, they're thinking about other things, or it can be external, something happening outside of our classroom. And then the situation is the time and place in which the speech communication occurs. I put a speech from Malala in Canvas. When you're watching and reviewing her speech, take note of the entire speech communication process. You also want to think of the frame of reference. What is the person's knowledge, experience, goals, values, and attitudes? What is the frame of reference of your listeners? And what is the frame of reference of you? Why are you experienced and able to talk about your subject? So when you're thinking of the listener, the frame of reference, everything is filtered through the listener's frame of reference. And no two people in the classroom have the same frame of reference. We get it from our upbringing, from what we've learned over time. So you do need to think about that, and you will learn about each of your classmates throughout our class. Another aspect you want to think about is ethnocentrism, believing one's group or culture is superior to all of the other groups or cultures. And this is something you want to avoid in our class. So how do you do that? Respect listeners' cultural values. Even if you don't understand or agree with what someone's talking about, that doesn't mean that you can't respect it and be a respectful listener. And then as a speaker, you want to adapt your messages to these expectations and imagine yourself in place of the listeners. This will definitely help you avoid being ethnocentric. Other things you can think about are, be alert to feedback. Watch your audience. Listen to their constructive criticisms. Listeners also have to avoid ethnocentrism. Like I said earlier, do not just because you might disagree with someone or not understand their cultural background doesn't mean that you can just shut off and not listen. You can still respect what they're saying. So that's the lecture I have for chapter 1. Now you can move on to the next chapter, and as always, feel free to ask me any questions you may have.